Okay. Should I start? How Yasam Yasama? It was an orphan boy and an orphan girl. Father had died, so the Yasam, he was entitled to inherit from his father, but he was a young boy, so it was an apotropos who was doling out the funds. Tasalakami the Rabba, Amalu Rabba. So Rabba said, well, the Yasama also wants some money. So hello the Yasam Bishul Yasama. So give some extra funds to the little orphan boy so that his sister, little orphan girl, will get more. This is in terms of mizonos. This is a question. Is she only allowed to is she only entitled to collect mizonos from a karka, from real estate, or even from movable properties? So what they were giving to the yasam was from movable properties, and from some of that was rolling over to the orphan daughter, to the sister. So I'm going to run on the Rava. Famaru, so the Chachamim asked Rava, but aren't you the one who said, that she's only allowed to collect for her mizonos from the that we call benos nukvan, from the movable real estate, from the non-movable real estate property, and not from the movable metalslin, not from the movable property. Whether it's in terms of taking care of benos nukvan mizonos, the obligation of the ksuba that the father left for her, or whether it's in terms of the kisuba, whether it's in terms of collecting a wife who's collecting a ksuva, or whether it's for panasa, the amount that's set aside for the daughters to be able to use to get married. So Rava said, well, when providing for the son who's an heir, so he's really entitled to inherit from the estate. So whatever his needs are, the apotropos, thank you so much, is going to provide for him because he gets to inherit the estate. So if he wanted a shippa, he wanted a maidservant, we would give it to him. So Koshken Haka Dikatarti. So here he gets a maidservant because his sister will help to take care of him. And we also get, in the process, we get to take care of her because we're going to pay her for being a maidservant. You got to pay money if you want to have a maidservant. So therefore, the money's going to go to her for the service that she's providing. And he's going to get a benefit himself because of the fact that his sister will help take care of him. So Tana Rabbanim, if we're dealing with possessions that were left by somebody who passed away, and there was real estate, that's what we call Yeshlan Achrayas, real estate property, and those that don't carry responsibility with them, if they would be transferred to a third party, the third party, there would be no lien upon them. So that's what we call Eilan Achrayas, there's no lien upon them. So either type of a property we would remove from the estate for purposes of Mosi and the Muslim Isha Levanos to be able to feed the widow. The widow is entitled to be fed from that's one of the rights that she has under the ksuva, is that she can be fed from the assets of the estate as long as she would like until she gets married, Levanos, and also for the daughters. For them to be sustained as well. So Divrei Rebbe, that's what Rebbe says. So Rishon ben Elazar Omer, Rishon ben Elazar says that it depends, that it's not true that we would also utilize metaltalin, movable property for this purpose. It's really only only real property that we would use for the muzzin of the bonus, and he's going to give different scenarios. So Rishon ben Elazar Omer, Nechasim sheyesh lanachrayas, if it's a real estate property. So that we would say Mosian Levanos Mina Banim, that if the sons had taken it, and the daughters need a certain amount of a property for mizonos in order to sustain them as they're growing up, or for panasa for purposes of a wedding dowry. So then we say that the sons who inherited from the estate have to provide that to the daughters, but only from the chasim sheyesh lanachrayas, only from the real estate property. Levanos minabanos, and if there are only daughters, let's say, so then if the big daughters want to take everything for themselves, so we say no, that if they're the heirs, so the little daughters, the katanos are just as much the heirs as the big daughters, and therefore they get to split equally everything. Levanim minabanim, and if you only had sons, so the sons are inheriting everything. So then the big sons, the adult sons, are not allowed to take everything for themselves. The little sons, the little boys, are also entitled to inherit. It's not a question of mizonos, it's a question of inheritance. It's a question of inheritance. So Gedolim and Ketanim, they all split the inheritance equally. Levanim and Abanos, and we would take away from the daughters. If the daughters took the entire estate for themselves, we would say if it's Menachasim Reuben, so then it has to go to the sons because it's up to the sons to dole out whatever the daughters need for their mizonos, for their parnasa, but it should start off going to the sons, and then the sons can give out to the daughters as is appropriate. However, if it's only a little bit of a real estate or a little bit of real estate that was left, so then the daughters are allowed to seize it for their mizonos purposes because if there's only a tiny little bit, then we say the bottom should be sholem al psakim. They should knock from door to door in order for people to sustain them. It's not proper to make the daughters knock from door to door. Let them take the little bit of estate that was left for their own mizonos and let the sons, figure out how to fend for themselves. However, if we're dealing with nechasim that don't carry a lien with them, namely we're talking about movable property, non-real estate property, so then we say mosil lebanim in abanim. So then if it's just an estate where all you have is sons, so then the adult sons are not allowed to take everything for themselves. There has to be split equally between the adult sons and the little boys. That's why we say mosil lebanim in abanim. The big boys, the adults have to share with the little ones. Levanos min abanos, and if it's only daughters, so the big daughters, the adult daughters have to share with the little daughters. Ulevarim min ha'abanos, and similarly, if the daughters would take the assets for themselves, even if there were only nechasim muatim, they're not allowed to, even if there were only a little bit of assets in the estate, but all it was movable property. The daughters don't get movable property, even from mizonos, they don't get movable property. That would have to go to the sons. So lo levanos min abanim. But we do not take away from the sons to have to sustain the daughters with movable property. And even though normally, if I have a machlokis between Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi and one of his colleagues who said the halakha is always like Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi, but in this case, we say no. In this case, the halakha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that the daughters do not get to be sustained for purposes of mizonos from the estate, unless we're dealing with real estate property, but not if we're dealing with movable property. Because Rabbi, after all, says that this is the bottom line halacha that everybody accepts. That the halacha is that when it comes to mizonos and when it comes to the wedding dowry that's going to be provided for the orphan girls, it was only provided from real estate assets and not from movable property. Bein l'ksuba, and that applies to the widow as well. She's only allowed to collect from real estate property and not from movable property. Bein l'ksuba, bein l'mizoni, bein leparnasa. Now, of course, there's a takanas hagonim that is important to mention. The takanas hagonim is mentioned by really Tosfos in the Dipo Maskim of Kakar V'Lam V'Taltali. The last 5 lines says Venira Bisman Azeh. Says nowadays the kulu gabi metaltali ksuv mizonos mitakanas hagonim. So takanas hagonim that a widow collects and the daughters collect their mizon. Widow collects a ksuva, the daughters collect their mizonos, even from metaltalin. Upanasanami anasadish kominedam dealing lahasi v'nosem metaltali. And even when it comes to providing a wedding dowry, we find that people regularly take from their movable property in order to provide wedding property. And he quotes the Gemara later on in Daf Samaches, where it's established that we know that the person would have wanted those assets or had sufficient assets that he would have wanted to set aside from his movable property to provide for the wedding dowry of his daughter. So then that would be included in what we take from. So therefore, the halacha is that at least nowadays, based on the takanas hagonim and based on people's expectations and regular course of dealing, that we do take from movable property and not simply from real estate. Okay.
The halacha changed during the period.
So the halacha changed. Now now Tosfos explains that the changing of the halacha really is based on this idea of umdene that we have later on in Daf Samaches that we'll get to, that if there is a clear understanding that this is what the person would have wanted and that they had the means to do so, then we would take even from movable property. So Tosfos kind of spins, shall we say, the takanas hagonim in such a way that it's not really in contradiction to the Gemara. It's just sort of an application of a later Gemara, as saying that nowadays this is the expectation with everybody, and that therefore it fits within that model of the Gemara later on. Okay, now your Mishnah. If he didn't write a ksuba, let's say a husband marries a wife and he says, no ksuba for you. No, it doesn't work. Even if he says no ksuba for you, she gets a ksuba. Even if they make a tanai, there's an explicit condition. He marries the woman. He says, on condition you're not going to get a ksuba. And she says, okay, I so desperately want to get married that I guess I'll waive the ksuba. No, it doesn't work. The tanai is batal, and she gets the ksuba anyway. The basula gets 200 zuz, and a widow gets 100 zuz. You can't waive the ksuba. An issue tonight bezdin because it's a tonight bezdin. Sometimes people enter prenuptial agreements and they waive everything. Say in the event that the husband dies or there's a divorce, so I'm waiving everything that I get. So I tell people you can't enter into a prenuptial agreement like that because you're not allowed to waive the ksuba. The husband's going to be obligated to pay the ksuba anyway. So you have to carve out the ksuba. Said except for the amount that he's obligated to pay under the ksuba. Okay, so if you're a lawyer, you have to remember. If they write a field which is worth only 100 sus in the husband's ksuba obligations, and the husband says this will satisfy my 200 sus obligation, that we're going to treat this field of 100 sus as if it's worth 200 sus. And he doesn't say, and all of my other assets are going to be responsible, going to be mortgaged for purposes of satisfying my 200 sus obligation. It doesn't matter. He's not allowed to get away with that. Only that one puny field that's only worth 100 sus. He has to mortgage all of his other assets. Right? He has to mortgage all of his assets in order to pay her the full 200 sus. Because this is considered to be a condition which is imposed by the bezdin, whether the parties like it or not, whether the husband agrees to it or not. And if he doesn't write, if you get captured, if you get taken hostage, then I'm going to redeem you, and I'm going to return you to be my lawfully wedded wife after I redeem you. Or in the case if she's married to a Kohen, in which case we'll assume that if she was taken by captors and they raped her, she's not going to be allowed to go back to her husband, because a Kohen is not allowed to live with his wife even if she's raped. If a non-Kohen's wife is raped, so then the non-Kohen is allowed to continue to live with her. However, a Kohen can't live with his wife if she is raped. So in the case of the Kohen, he has to write, instead of dipping nosach, it just says, I'm going to redeem you, and I'm going to return you to your home. I'll make sure that you get redeemed and returned to your home. Obviously, they won't be able to continue to be married to you. But even if he didn't write this stipulation, chayav, he's still going to be obligated to tonight bezdin, because this is a condition of the bezdin. Happened to my great grandfather. His wife was raped, and he had to divorce her. He was a Kohen. She was raped by a Kozak. I mean, he went further. He killed the Kozak, and then he ran away and changed his name, and his whole story. Nishbeis chayav. What? My great grandfather. That's how my name became Reese. Yeah. Okay. He killed the Kozak, changed his name. Nishbeis chayav liftosa, and if Nishbeis chayav liftosa, if she is, so this is one of the tanaim of the bezdin, that if a wife is taken captive, the husband is obligated to redeem her. You're not allowed to contract around, even if she would agree at the time of marriage. The poskim will say, if she agreed at the time of marriage that she waives this privilege, we say you have no right to waive it. We don't want this obligation to be imposed on the community. It's the husband's obligation to redeem his wife if she's taken captive. And if he says, well, I'm going to give her a get because I don't want to be married to her anymore, she was taken captive, good, fine, I'm happy to be rid of her. Now pay her full ksuba amount and let her, redeem herself through the ksuba amount. He has no right to say that. Let's say that she gets very, very ill. She's very sick. So he's obligated to furnish all of the payments to heal her, and to provide her medical care. So if it's gotten to the point where he just can't live with her anymore because she's so terribly sick, so he says, you know what, I want to divorce her, and I'll pay the ksuba, terapi asasma, and let her pay herself through the money of the ksuba. So Rashai, so he's allowed to do that. So it's a question nowadays that we say that you can't do Beno Gershom, and it's a kana, you're not allowed to divorce a woman against the will. So as her husband's still allowed to do this. He's still allowed to say, my wife is so sickly that I want to give her the get, and let her take care of herself through the ksuba money. Is he allowed to do that? According to the Bach, he's still allowed to do that, and many of the other Achronim disagree with the Bach. Gemara says, "Money Rabbi Meir." So who's our Mishnah going like? Our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Meir. The Amma kol apoches the besulam and masayim lamana mimona harezu bilas nus. Rabbi Meir is bilas nus. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that if you decrease the ksuba amount that you're obligated to pay, namely 200 zuz for a besula first-time wife, 100 zuz if she's an almana, and a person says, I'm going to pay less than that, and even if they make a tanai, so then that's considered to be a bilas nus. A bilas nus, even though she's entitled to the money, but because she thinks that she's not going to receive the money, she doesn't have the security of a feeling that she's going to get a payment of money in the event that the husband would divorce her. So now she's worried her husband might divorce her, so that is not a proper state of marriage. And therefore, the be'ilos that they have, any relationship, any relations that they have are considered to be promiscuous relations. It's considered to be bilas nus. See Rabbi Yehuda ha'amar, because after Rabbi Yehuda says that if they want, what's the cost of the Vasula Shtar Shemasayim? Because there's Kabalti. If you want, you can write a shtar. You have to write a ksuba of 200 zuz that the husband is obligated to give to the wife, but she's allowed to write a shtar saying, I am treating this as if I have received the 200 zuz already. I have received the money, right? Money because it's about kamishin. So she can say, if it was a 200 zuz, I've already received 100. If she's a basula, if it's 100 zuz, she can say, I've already received 50. And therefore, when the time comes, if they get divorced or he dies, so she's only allowed to collect the remainder, even though she never received anything. She's just like saying a hodas badin. She's saying it says zip, I've already received that amount. So Ruda says you're allowed to do that. So Ema Sefer, so the ratio of the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Meir, who says that she's not allowed to be mochelis, that she's not allowed to waive any of the amount, that it has to be that he owes her the full amount, 200 zuz for Basula and 100 zuz for an Amana. So the ratio of our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Meir, but the Sefer of our Mishnah seems to be going like Rabbi Yehuda. Contradiction. Ema Sefer, the Sefer of the Mishnah says, if he writes a field which is to be a lien for the ksuba that's only worth 100 zuz and says this will count as 200 zuz, takas b'sayim zuz, lo kaslak when a custom and he doesn't say, and the rest of my assets are going to be subordinate or mortgaged for purposes of paying the ksuba. Chayav, he's obligated anyway, despite the fact that he didn't write it in the shtar. Chayav should tonight bezdin because it's considered as if. Despite the fact that it was omitted from the shtar, it's considered as if it was written in the shtar. So who says that? Who has that idea that if you didn't write that certain assets are mortgaged for the purpose of the husband's obligation, they're mortgaged anyway, that it's considered like the sofer just forgot to write them, but we consider them to be imputed as if they were, that those conditions were written in the shtar. Also, the Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says, the mortgage of the assets, whenever there's a debt and a shtar is presented, so if the mortgage was not written in the shtar, then we just say the scribe made an error. It's a scribal error, and it's going to be considered as if it was written in the contract anyway. Rabbi Meir, because after Rabbi Meir doesn't hold by that principle. Rabbi Meir says that if you did not write the mortgage and subordination of the assets in the shtar, so then those assets are not considered to be mortgaged. It's not, because we have a Mishnah that says, let's say that you found a promissory note on the street, and the promissory note says Ruvain is obligated to pay Shimon $1 million. So are you allowed to give that shtar back to Shimon so he can collect $1 million from Ruvain? You found the promissory note on the street. Turn the page and now the basement. So if the shtar actually says that Ruvain, that Shimon is entitled to collect $1 million from the assets that are on Ruvain's property right now, or even the assets that Ruvain sold to other people, so then we say that you're not allowed to return the shtar to Shimon, Shebezdin Nifrain Mehen, because Bezdin is going to act upon that shtar since it has a chrayas. It says that even if the assets are going to be sold to a third party, the Bezdin will be allowed to pull the assets away from the third party who paid for them in order to satisfy the debt that Ruvain owes to Shimon, and therefore we're afraid of a kanunya. We're afraid that Ruvain and Shimon engaged in some type of a monetary scheme, and a fraudulent scheme with each other. What's the fraudulent scheme? That maybe this promissory note was already repaid by Ruvain to Shimon, so Shimon received his $1 million, and that now Shimon's going to get it back, and they're going to collect assets from a third party that Ruvain had sold assets to, and Shimon and Ruvain are going to split the money. They're going to take the assets that Ruvain had sold to a third party, and now they're going to sell those assets once they collect it for Shimon's quote-unquote debt, which really had already been satisfied, and they're going to split it by, for 500,000 Ruvain and 500,000 for Shimon. The purchasers are then going to come after Ruvain, and they'll say, well, you have, we have the same right towards you, that you sold us these bad assets, that now have been collected from us, and therefore we want to be reimbursed for the $500,000 that we lost, that since it was collected from us. So the answer is, Rashi says it's in Bava Metzia, that when Ruvain sold the assets to the third parties, he explicitly wrote in the shtar that they have no right to come after them in the event that the assets are collected by a creditor. And if you explicitly write in the shtar that there is no right to come after the assets, so that everybody would agree, then in that case, there is no subordination of the assets. The only question is if you write nothing. So if you write nothing, so you have the machlokas Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, is considered as if you wrote that there is subordination and the right to go back to collect. However, if there is an explicit carve out in the star saying that there'll be no mortgage, then there's no mortgage. So amen machrayis nechasim. So again, Rabbi Meir continues to say that if the star did not have machrayis nechasim written in it, yakser she'ain bezdin nifroim mehen. So then you would be allowed to return the star to Shimon, because in such a case, the bezdin is not going to go after third parties, so you don't have to worry about a kinyan. You don't have to worry about some fraudulent scheme that Reuven and Shimon are engaged in. Rabbi Meir will ever say no. Even if the right of subordination of the assets is not written in the star itself, Echad said there's no lien that is written in the star. We impute a lien to be as if it was written in the star, and therefore we have to worry about a fraudulent scheme either way. Echad said lo yaksir, you cannot return the star to the creditor, to Shimon, Shebezdin, Nifroim Man, because Bezdin is going to go after third parties, so I'm worried about a kanunya. So we see that there is this machlokas when it comes to shtaros in general. The Rabbi Meir holds that if you did not write a mortgage in the shtar, there's no mortgage. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, even if you didn't write, there is a mortgage. So that's the concept of the Sefer of our Mishnah, saying even if you didn't write it, it's a Tanai Bezdin. So Reisha Rabbi Meir, so the Reisha that says that you're not decrease the amount of the ksuba is going like Rabbi Meir. The Sefer that says that even if you didn't mortgage all the assets and it's not written in the shtar, it's considered as if all the assets are mortgaged, even though it wasn't written in the ksuba, that's going like Rabbi Yehuda. So how can it be? Rabbi Meir. Okay, so then that seems to be the conclusion. Reishis Rabbi Meir and Sefer Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir. So you want to argue that no, the whole thing is going like Rabbi Meir. Our entire mission is going like Rabbi Meir. We shine on Rabbi Meir and Ksula Shtari. And Rabbi Meir draws a distinction between a ksuba and a ksuba. If you did not write that all the assets of the husband are mortgaged, it's considered as if it was written. In other stars that are not a ksuba, so then Rabbi Meir would say, "Achrais labto sofa," who that if you didn't write the mortgage, it's not considered as if there's a mortgage. When we shining labor, we don't find that there is a distinction according to Rabbi Meir between a ksuba and other assets. For Tanya, because the price says explicitly, "Chamisha goin min amechurarin ve'eluhen." There were 5 different creditors who only have the right to collect from available assets, and if there were assets that were transferred to a third party, then they have no right to go after the third party. So if the debtor, the one who owes the money, had transferred his real estate assets to a third party, normally a creditor could go after those real estate assets even when it went to the kukos. However, in this case, it's only when the properties are actually in the debtor's possession that the creditor can go after it, but otherwise not. Anyway, what are the categories? So what is payros? Shevach payros. What are the categories of payros? So Rashi really over here explains Shevach payros. Payros is a question as to whether Rashi really explains the way that it's understood in the Shulchan Aruch. The case of payros is that somebody, a gazlan, steals a field. He steals a field, and he also eats from the payros of the field. So, in terms of the field itself, so there we say that he's obligated to give back whatever he stole. Let's say that the field is no longer, in his possession. So he's obligated to pay back the field, even from possessions that have been transferred. But when it comes to the payros that he ate, so the payros that he ate, which is a little bit more difficult to define. So in terms of what the amount might be and so forth, so it's difficult for the kuchos to know what they're getting themselves into when they purchase the field. So when it comes to the payros that he ate, so that can only be collected from his available assets and not from his transferred assets. The shevach payros, case of shevach payros is if the person purchased the field from a ganav. And I purchased the field. I didn't know he was a ganav. I purchased the field from him. And now the person who originally owned the field says, okay, I have the original title, right? This was the title report was not so impeccable. So he says, I have the original title to the field, and therefore I'm going to take it away from you, purchaser. So now the purchaser goes back to the ganav and says, I want to be able to collect what I paid for the field. So he can collect what he paid for the field, even from subordinated assets of the ganav. But the shevach payros, that which the payros that he grew on the field, so that's not part of the real estate itself. That he's not allowed to collect from the kuchos. He can only collect that from available possessions that the ganav has. And similarly, if a person marries a woman and the woman had children, she had sons and daughters from a previous marriage, or she was a widow, let's say, and he took upon himself that he's going to take care of her young children, of her sons and her daughters. So then we say that the right to be able to collect from him is only from his available assets and not from his subordinated assets, unless he made a kinyan to the contrary. Or if you have, sometimes we use the word get just to mean shtar in general. And nowadays, sort of the regular colloquialism is that we only use get with respect to get isha, but get also means any shtar any kind of a promissory note or so forth. So it's a promissory note that doesn't have a chlayas, that didn't say that the creditor is allowed to collect from the subordinated assets of the debtor, or from the assets of the debtor. There's no subordination. So then the creditor would not be allowed to collect from third parties from assets that were transferred subsequently from the debtor to a third party. So who says that? Who says that if the assets were not explicitly mortgaged, they're not considered to be mortgaged? That's Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir holds that it means that it's an explicit condition. And the same thing applies to Ksuvas Isha, a woman who wants to collect a Ksuva, but the Ksuva does not state that the assets of the husband were mortgaged. She's only allowed to collect from available assets of the husband, and not from assets that were transferred to third parties. So who's the one who says that when it comes to other shtaros, other than a Ksuva, that if the achrayas, the mortgage was not written, it's considered like there is no mortgage? So that's Rabbi Meir. So that's the case of a get chov, shein bo achrayas, all right? Katanik Ksuvas Isha. And not only does he have this rule here with respect to other shtaros, but he explicitly has the rule. He puts together this rule in the case of the shtar chov, together with the case of the Ksuvas Isha. He combines the two cases together and says that so too in the case of the Ksuvas Isha, if the assets were not mortgaged, we're not going to deem them as if they were mortgaged. So we see Rabbi Meir, who's clearly the author of this brisa, holds that way with respect to both cases. So Ibai say Rabbi Meir, so we can say, you know what, we can really say that our Mishnah is going complete like Rabbi Meir, despite all of this. Ibai say Rabbi Yehuda, we can really say that our Mishnah is going completely according to Rabbi Yehuda, despite all of this as well. How can we do that? Well, I'll tell you how. Ibai say Rabbi Yehuda, say the Mishnah is going completely according to Rabbi Yehuda. Hasam, Kasvale, Hiskabalti. When is it? The Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to decrease the amount of the ksuba. He said our ratio is not going like Rabbi Yehuda because we say you're not allowed to decrease the amount of the ksuba. Maybe you're only not allowed to decrease the amount. You're only allowed according to Rabbi Yehuda to decrease the amount of the ksuba when the woman explicitly says it's as if I have already received a portion of the ksuba. However, in our Mishnah, she didn't say that. She never said. Just the husband made it tonight. Said, "Oh, you get no ksuba," and she said, "Okay." Because she figured, Bezdin will come to my defense. So Hakalo Kasvale Hiskabalti, but she never said it says if I have received the amount. So therefore, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that she still gets the full ksuba. Ibai Sema, or alternatively, I could say that our Mishnah is fully Rabbi Meir, and even the Sefer is going like Rabbi Meir. How does that work? Rabbi Meir, my chayev, when it says in the Sefer of our Mishnah that the husband is obligated to furnish her with other assets besides the one piece of real estate that's only worth 100 zuz that he set aside. Diktani, what does it mean when it says that in the Mishnah? It doesn't mean from assets that get transferred to third parties subsequently. It means to other available assets that the husband still has at the time of the death or the divorce. So that's what she'll be allowed to collect from, but not from assets that are transferred. There's no subordination. So there's no subordination in terms of the kuchos. So lokasla v'chule. So we said in the Mishnah that if he didn't write to her the ksuva, so then he's still obligated. And we talk about his other obligations. If she gets taken captive, then he's obligated to redeem her and take her back to be his wife if he's not going. So I'm avoid the Shmuel. So the father of Shmuel said a very big chiddush. He said, Eishes Yisrael, if it's the wife of Yisrael Shenan, so she was raped. So Asua Levaila. So he says that even though her husband is not a Kohen, he's only a Yisrael, she's not allowed to go back to her husband despite the fact that she was raped, because maybe by the end of the rape, she was having a good time already. And therefore, it was a willful act of adultery, in which case, if she's like a sota, and she wouldn't be allowed to remain with her husband. That's what the father of Shmuel said. Can you believe that? Worried maybe at the beginning it was against the will, but then at the end she came to like him. So Esrei Rav Lavu de Shmuel. So Rav asked the kasha to Shmuel's father. He said, "Whoa, like Eddie said, Im tishtabaya pakinach," but it says in our Mishnah that there's an obligation, a condition. It's one of the 10 obligations that a husband has towards his wife. That if you're taken captive, then I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to take you back to be my wife. So we see that we do assume that it was against the will the entire time, or even if at the end it was baratzon, it doesn't count. And therefore, she would be allowed to live with him again. So Ishtik, so Abu Dishmael did not have a good answer. So Tori Rab, so Rab said he really could have had a good answer. He said, I asked the kasha to Abu Dishmael, and I thought he's going to come back with a good answer, and he could have, but he didn't. So Kari Rab led to Abu Dishmael. He said, what happened to him is the pasuk in Eob. That a great nobleman was stripped of his ability to speak, and he had to place his mouth on his lips, that he couldn't come up with a good answer, despite the fact that he was very distinguished and normally would have been able to do so. So what could he have said? What do you mean Abu Dishmael would have had a good answer? What possible good answer, Eddie, could have avoided the Shmuel could have come up with? Well, he could have said, B'shvuya kilu. He could have said, no, the case where a woman's taken captive, we don't really know if she was violated altogether. So since it's like a sveka, we don't know if she was violated. If she was violated, we don't know if it was willing at all. So therefore, then we're going to be mako. But if it's not a case of shvuya, just a woman is raped. So then we have to be worried. We know that she was raped. We have to be worried that maybe it was baratza, maybe she was agreeable to it at the end, and therefore she can't go back to her husband. What?
In a way, you punish the husband. The husband would and want her back. Now you punish the husband too.
Hey, my great grandfather had to divorce his wife. So Heichi Mishkakasla. So Abu de Shmuel, honest to Shaya Rahman Heichi Mishkakasla. So wait a second, but according to Shmuel's father, the case where the father says Vihilon Ispasa, that is if she's not raped, so then she's prohibited to her husband and we punish her. But if she is raped, she's allowed to go back to her husband. So the Torah says that pretty explicitly that a woman is raped is allowed to go back to her husband. So where do we find that that would be the case? If we always have to worry that whenever we know that she's raped, that maybe it was baratz and maybe it was considered willing by the end of the act of the rape. So Heichi Mishkakasla, Kigon to come aid them. So we say there would have to be a case where there were witnesses who were standing there the whole time, and they saw that she's screaming from the beginning to the end. That it was never willing. From the beginning to the end, she was angry. This whole idea of Abu de Shmuel is completely against what Rava says, because Rava says that Rava, of course, she tells about us that if it started out as rape, even if at the end she was willing, it still counts as rape. Even if she says that we catch him in the act of rape because he's finishing up his rape, and she says, leave him alone. That even if he would not have come to rape me, I would have hired him to be with me. So Muteris, nonetheless, she's still considered to be permissible. My timer, why is that? Because we say Yetzer Abasha, because her inclination for promiscuity got the better of her, but it's only based on the fact that he raped her in the first place, so therefore it doesn't count. So Tanya Kavase de Rava, there's a brisa that supports this notion of Rava. It says V'hilon ispasa asur. It says V'hilon ispasa. That's the pasuk in the Torah that says Ve'edein ba v'hilon ispasa, that if she wasn't raped, then she's prohibited to go back to her husband. If it was a willing act of adultery, asur, then she's prohibited. Hanispasa muteris. So the implication is that if she was raped, she's permitted. And it says he. With respect to this woman that we're talking about, the Sota case, so then we draw that distinction. So it sounds like there's another woman for whom we would not draw that distinction. It should be permissible to her husband either way. There's another case, that even though she wasn't raped, she's still going to be mutaris, permissible to her husband. And who is this type of woman? If she was raped at the beginning, and we know that at the end she was willing, and she said, "Oh no, I want to, remain with him." It doesn't matter. We still treat it as a rape because of the fact that she was assaulted to begin with. So therefore, we just say Yetzer Albasha, that she just the normal course of physical desire, set in, but essentially it was an act of rape, and therefore she's permitted to her husband.
It's almost like more aggressive than it's a borderline.
Borderline. You might say it's kind of like a statutory rape. So Tanya Idach, right? That we say if it started out as rape, even if at the end she said, she sort of gives in, we say that's still considered to be statutory rape. So Tanya Idach, so we have another brisa that says sort of in the other direction. It sounds like only this woman, if she was not raped, she's going to be prohibited. But there's another type of woman who, even if she wasn't raped, she would be prohibited to her husband. It's another type of woman that even if she was raped, she's going to be prohibited. And we know what that case is. That's the case of my great-grandfather. This is the case of a woman who's married to a Kohen who's raped, because even if she's raped, she's not allowed to remain with her husband. So another limud from this. What's another case where a woman, if she would be not raped, she would be permitted to her husband. It's another case where even if the woman was not raped, she would remain permitted to her husband. This would be a woman who she didn't have any nisuin yet. Let's say she was only betrothed, and she was betrothed based on a condition, and the condition turned out to be a false condition. The man said, "I'm betrothing you. I'm asked that I have $1 million," and it turns out that he owes $1 million. So that would not be a valid marriage. We say that the Tanai is Kayim. They haven't lived together yet. She's only an Arusa, so the Tanai is still considered to be Kayim. So even if she lives with another man, she has relations with another man during this period of time, she can do so and still be permitted to the original man, because we say that Kiddushin never really took effect because of the fact that it was based on a Tanai and never took hold. It was Kiddushei Tos. Shafilu benam mokav aksefa memanis or lachasla. Even if she had a child already from this man, they weren't supposed to live together. But okay, Shafilu benam mokav aksefa memanis or lachasla. She's still allowed to say, I'm not interested in this marriage because the marriage never really took hold. Maybe they lived together in sin or whatever, but the marriage never really took hold. We never had any suin or anything. Everything was based on a Tanai, and the Tanai did not take effect, and therefore the Kiddushin didn't take effect, and therefore even if she lives with another man, it would not prohibit her from eventually marrying that man for whom she did not have a valid Kiddushin. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hari Nashi de Ganmi. If you have a woman who was stolen by Genovim, they were taken hostage by hijackers, kidnappers, Sharian Leguvrayu. So, and the kidnappers violated the woman. So we say that we assume it was rape, and therefore she can go back to her husband, assuming the husband's not a kohen. So So Chachamim said to Yehuda, but we know that these women who are, taken hostage, they're very nice to their captors. They go out to the store, they get them bread. So we say, no, that's machmas yira. That's because they're terrified of them. That if they make one false step, so then they're going to get killed. So that's why they do it. But it's not. But it's still an unwilling relationship. How come shalkan lahu giri? But they actually load their ammunition for them. They provide their arrows for them to shoot to shoot in their war, in their battles. So we say no, they load their ammunition also machmas yira because they're afraid if they don't do so, so then their boyfriends are going to kill them. Their hijackers are going to kill them. However, for sure, if the captors say you're free to go on, your own, and we're letting you go free and loose, and you can go back to your original husbands, and they say no, we're going to stay with you. You're nicer and you have more money than our original husband. So then, so then they for sure are going to be prohibited because that's considered to be a volitional choice to remain with their kidnappers, and then they would in fact be considered to be willing participants who would be prohibited to their husband. Let's say that they were taken captive by the king. They're taken captive by the king. So then they're considered to be like regular shibuyin, like regular women taken captive who, if they're raped by their captors, it's considered to be non-willing, and they would be allowed to go back to their husbands if they're Yisraelim afterwards. However, if they're the people who take them captive are just like the heads of gangs, the heads of like bandits, so then if they live with those individuals, we say that's not considered to be shvuyin. We're worried that maybe they really wanted to stay with them because they figure they'll have a better life with them. We have a brisa that says the opposite. So we say, no, we can reconcile that those discrepancies because malchus and malchus lokasha, when we say that if they're taken by the king, so then they're allowed to go back to their husbands. So that's how malchus achashverosh. That's talking about if they're taken by Achashverosh, because they don't really expect that when Esther was an exception to the rule. The vast majority of girls who were taken by Achashverosh were not really going to be married by Achashverosh. They're just going to be violated by Achashverosh. They don't really expect that Achashverosh is going to keep them as a wife. So therefore, they're just being taken against the will, and therefore it's an act of rape, and they can therefore go back to their husbands. However, when we speak about a kingdom where they really might have had a volitional relationship, that's Ben Netzer. That's like Billy the Kid. That's like, somebody who's a big bandit who's going to have like his own little, fiefdom based on all of the booty and and all of the hijackings and the robberies that he does. So they figure that, this fellow doesn't need like such a high quality wife. It's not like he needs to marry a duchess or something like that. Maybe he'll really marry me, and it's not so bad to be married to Billy the Kid as long as he doesn't get caught, right? Because then you'll have like, lots of money from all the train robberies or whatever. Maybe therefore she'll have a volitional relationship with him. Listos lokasha, and so too if we're talking about bandits. So when is it considered to be that she would be prohibited when she's taken captive by a bandit, and when not? So when we talk about bandits as well, so there's a bandit, who's like on a high level bandit like Billy the Kid, where he's like some mafia boss, and she figures, I'll have a good life, because mafia wives are treated very well. So she figures I'll have a good life with him, and therefore she has a willing relationship with him. Have a listen to the Alma, or if it's just, stam, a bum off the street who just takes her captive. So she doesn't want to remain with a bum off the street. I mean, some standards she's going to have. So you're going to be with a bandit. So be with like a high profile, big shot bandit. But if it's not a big shot bandit, so then it's going to be considered an unwilling relationship. Over Ben Netzer, Hasam Karile Melech, Karile Liston, which is it? Make up your mind. This Billy the Kid, is he considered to be a king? So we say that one case of the Malchus is talking about him. or is he considered to be a listim? That we say the one case of the listim where she will be prohibited to her husband is talking about him. Which is he? Is he a king or is he a bandit? So we say it depends. It's all relative. In Gabi Achashverosh listimu, compared to Achashverosh, she was like a legitimate king of 127 kingdoms. So then Billy the Kid is considered to be a bandit. Gabi listim the Alma. But if it is, some sort of a kid who is just a stama, a teenager, punk. So if it's a stam punk, compared to a stam punk, Melachu, so then he's considered to Billy the Kid is considered to be a king. With the Kohen Hennes, the wife of a Kohen, so he has to write in the ksuba that he's going to return her to her Medina, but he can't remain married to her. So I'm gonna buy a monol Kohen Gadol Chaylev Tosa. Machlokes Abai and Rava. Abai says there was an illegitimate marriage when Isulav was violated. The widow was married to a Kohen Gadol, so he still is obligated to redeem her because, after all, he can still satisfy this deny of the ksuba that he's not going to remain married to her because it was prohibited to him anyway. He's just going to return her to her original domicile. Shani Shnikoribo, the Kahenes Advina Kamadina Seh, Mizeres and Asin Yisrael. But if it's a case of Mizeres and Asin Yisrael, Eno Chaylev Dosa. Normally, if she's married to a Yisrael, he would have to take her back to be his wife. So since he can't do that, so he's not obligated to redeem her. Because the normal provision for the wife of Yisrael is that he has to say, I'm going to take you back to be a wife, and here he's not allowed to. Rava says, no, the same thing that you said about Miseres and Nesina is true about a monolith Kohen Gadol as well. He's not obligated to redeem her. I mean, he could pay her the ksuva and tell her to, you redeem yourself through the ksuva. And whatever payros I ate from your assets, you could use, the money of that payros in order to redeem yourself. But beyond that, he doesn't have to go. Rava Markoshi Issa Shabuya going love Chaylev Dosa. That when is it that he would be obligated to redeem his wife who is married to him? He's a Kohen. That's if she otherwise would have been permitted to him, and it's only because she was taken captive that she's not permitted to him. It's the Daracha going love, but if she was prohibited to him anyway, so then the original provision of the Ksuba, the Tnai Vezin doesn't go into effect. And then he wouldn't be obligated to redeem her. Stop.
Okay, there.